Hi, I'm Luis Reyes, and welcome to another Butcherbird Presents, where we have conversations about people working in the digital space doing really interesting stuff. Today, our guest is Michaella Vu, a VR filmmaker and actress, and we're going to talk to her all about her work, and then maybe riff a little bit about kind of just VR theoretically, like what makes it tick and what makes it so exciting kind of moving forward. And just to let you guys know, if anybody has any questions, definitely comment on the live link, and we would love to answer some questions at the end of the show. And also, please like the Butcherbird Facebook page, and you'll learn about these conversations when they happen. We broadcast every Thursday morning, unless there's some sort of change in schedule. I think we did Reggie Watts on a Tuesday. Sorry, name dropping. But let's, today we have Michaella Vu, and I'd like to just start a little bit by talking about what your most recent project is, right? Mm-hmm. And then we'll go back and talk about kind of your background and how you got to this point. But tell us a little bit about Metadimensional.
All right, so Metadimensional is a meta story. So it's a singular story structure web series that leads you from a 360 bubble, spherical bubble, to the immersive web. So going on to okay, now this is a website, and you can go into this website and explore in three-dimensional space.
Right, yeah, like almost like a video game kind of moving around
Right.
a 3D environment.
Right,
but
right.
It's in this web portal. Mm-hmm. And then what's in that world is what you're exploring in your film.
Right, because video assets are flat. So it's taking the concept of flat spherical two-dimensional
mm-hmm.
space going to actual three-dimensional space. So actually skipping dimensions within the mediums.
That's awesome. So what is the main idea behind Metadimensional? Like, what's the story, if there is a story?
So it's about two sisters that after their father passes away, they discover this headset that allows them to dimensionally travel. So these girls are dimensionally traveling, discovering, little elements of their past, and I wanted the audience or, the experiencer to actually dimensionally travel. And there's a big argument too with, what is, VR in the space, and,
sure, yeah,
and going
yeah.
with, okay, so 360 video is only VR if it is or isn't stereo, and
sure.
this whole 9 yards. And for me, it's okay, well, video assets are flat at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to actually, play on the concept of, okay, let's take the same asset and see it in multiple different way.
Right, and that's interesting because you mentioned the whole idea of it's not VR unless it's in stereo, but yeah, even they're all flat, even if you trick the eye into thinking they have depth, and that's kind of what you're playing
it's
with.
just it's still flat, but you're just taking right and left eye to make the illusion of volume, but you still can't see the other side of the object with stereo. So
right, you're still living in a world of flat images,
mm-hmm.
which is interesting. I have really liked, your stuff. Up till seeing Metadimensional, I'd only seen Neural Path, and we'll talk about Neural Path in a second. But now I've seen two of your pieces, so I kind of feel I've seen the body of your work at this point, right? I know there are going to be many VR films to come, but before we start diving into the nuts and bolts of it, what I like about your work is that you are treating the immersive space as almost like a blank canvas, right? You're not saying it's a home only for VR film, just filming people in a space. It's not a home just for CGI, like inundating you with CGI around you. You're blending all of that so imaginatively. So I guess what I want to ask is how do you approach VR? Like, how do you see VR?
Well, coming from, I came into the entertainment space as an actor, mm-hmm. and so I've wanted to act, since I was 14. And so I've had a little bit of theater experiencing, with that as well. So theater, mainly film and on camera. And I see it from a very theatrical standpoint. Uh-huh. So when I was in New York, I experienced Sleep No More. Uh-huh. And that was an incredibly, mind-changing reality for me. And I always take that as a great example for how to build virtual spaces.
Oh, good. Yeah, if anybody doesn't know, Sleep No More is basically the play Macbeth, but iterated over 5 floors of a walk-up in New York, and you could follow any of the actors, and they're not necessarily doing the play straight up. Some of it's dance, some of it's spoken poetry, sometimes it's scenes from the play itself, but it's all kind of mixed up. And so story in that sense is almost sort of secondary to experience.
Well, it's really rooted in the environment. The environment is just richly filled with story, and it's not on a linear pathway. So you don't have the same person ever experiencing the same story structure.
Right. Is that how you look at your work? I mean, would you want people to go in there and sort of not necessarily take away the same story each time?
Yes, especially with metadimensional and the web VR aspect of it. You know, the intention is to play it out and build the world out. So it's almost like, you know, let's say like World of Warcraft is a world, right? And you just go and endlessly explore and come across, you know, different story structures. And so we live in this age where, you know, for 120 years, we've seen this, you know, linear story structure on a rectangle passively. Yeah. And so there's going to be a time when technology and stories, because stories, even the structure of story wasn't a rectangle. It was prior to that, it was many other different structures. So it's what's the next story structure, right? Coming forward with technology and this huge emergence of, you know, this kind of singular kind of, you know, and the reason for media all coming together. VR is immersivity, because as we said, 360 VR, all this stuff is a little confusing. But the idea of being immersive is in and of itself its own medium. Right.
It has its own narrative rules. If it even teases narrative, I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily, but it has its own rules and its own way of affecting the audience. And I guess what I really love about your stuff is that you're really pushing the envelope in terms of what really provokes people, you know? And I feel like before we go on, we should definitely show people what we're talking about. We should show a clip from Neural Path, which is your first VR film. And can we play that right now, and then we'll respond to it.
Oh, I see you're feeling a little something already. Ready to shed the veil of ignorance? You know, in order to achieve nirvana, you have to experience rebirth. Imagine your brain split between past and future, frozen in a moment in time.
So visually arresting, converging different kinds of media, live action with animation and motion graphics and soundscape. You're playing a lot with soundscape, and even with the graphics, they're not graphics necessarily that we recognize immediately as, oh yeah, that's a CG dragon. It's something entirely different. Just to orient people around this, the beginning of the film, this guy jacks your weed, right? And this is kind of your psychedelic revenge on him for jacking your weed.
Yes. So, you know, initially it's like taking the whole first person and third person and kind of combining it together, because you're going on the experience with him,
right.
You know, as the revenge trip. But, you know, at the end of it, you find out that it's a dream anyway, so if it really happened or not.
Well, you find out that it's a dream, but then you look around and there's still that strange little animation thing floating in the room with her, right?
Right.
You should definitely see this, guys. I know we're alluding to things you haven't seen yet, but...
So also elaborating too on the clip, so that transition shot after it goes completely crazy.
Yeah.
That was created in Janus VR, so using, you know, web VR and really building out a space. So that space actually exists three-dimensionally. You can actually explore it to the other side. And when we filmed, it was kind of a happy accident. My friend who worked on the web VR version to create that, you know, crazy 360 shot, he was on set and he just had his Tango, his, you know, Project Tango phone, and was just, you know, scanning the set as he usually scans, you know, other objects in the world three-dimensionally all the time. So he just had this asset available to me. So when we were building, it was kind of a happy accident to kind of, okay, what do we do with this now? And then kind of realizing, okay, now we've discovered this new method for matching 360 shots that we shot with a video asset
to an actual three-dimensional.
Right, because you have to get it to a sweet spot anyway. So we were like taking a screenshot of like the video asset and trying to match it, so it would transition kind of smoother. But it's very layered, so it was So that one I never ended up publishing the website in which it was built in, which I elaborate further with the next project.
Now, would you later on would you do that? I mean, is there a possibility we might see a neural path website somewhere down the line?
Perhaps. I mean, it exists, right? I just haven't published it quite yet.
Okay.
So.
But let's talk a little bit creatively about neural path. How did you? So you were even talking about the work process and sort of developing that moment and how it was a happy accident. How much of that did you plan before you shot, and how much of it did you sort of experiment with after it was shot?
Well, a lot of it was, especially being my first really big, endeavor into the space. I knew about Janus and what it could do through my friend Illusion, and I understood the parameters around that, but going in and really understanding how to marry it all together was kind of a challenge.
But your intention was to do that from the beginning.
It was because it was a technology that I wanted to really just throw in there. There was also some neural networks in there, so it was a little bit of AI stylistically thrown in there too, just to be like, okay, I've utilized this technology as well.
Right.
And so, putting it all together too was like, how do you storyboard? There's not really a normal format for storyboarding spherically. So, even the storyboard was a little bit, okay, now I have to like jump out of the traditional way that I'm used to and really understand how to like map it out, like almost like a theatrical space.
Right. Like, so almost like you were writing staging notes.
Right.
For an actual theater environment. What? So tell us about the story a little bit. I mean, in a way, if you look at just kind of story-wise, it seems pretty simple. A guy takes this woman's weed, and then somewhere down the line, he's kidnapped and taken to a warehouse in which she executes some kind of revenge on him. And then she wakes up, and it's all been a dream. That's the story. That's the plot, right?
Right.
So talk about the piece then in relation to that story, but what the piece is actually trying to accomplish.
So the piece itself, it was something that it's a story that I've always wanted to write for a very long time, and I actually wanted to write it as a script and really, But when the opportunity came, and my friend who gave me funding for Neural Path through a dream he had, and sent me a Facebook message saying he had this dream. Hadn't seen him in 9 years.
You should have more friends with dreams. I think that's great.
It was just very random, like friend from elementary school, and it was just having that concept of a dream, right? The fact that he came in and had a dream and gave me funding for it. I wanted it to also loop into the actual story structure of it. So hence why I end it as waking up from a dream.
I see. And then you use a lot of dream logic in the way that kind of things are moving around, the fact that there's this metaphorical snake there that we don't quite understand.
Right.
Do you see, I guess, VR, I've heard several people talk about VR in this way, that in a way VR is perfect for sort of exploring dream logic, because it doesn't have to make sense.
No.
Temporality is spongy. Story is sort of based on suggestion in a way. Right. So did a lot of that consciously work into the imagery you used?
Oh, absolutely. It helped with the production. Okay. Well, it wasn't like, okay, I'm taking the shot and now I have to make something, realistic, match it immediately. I was like, no, this can be messy. This is anything. Like, this is like wide as your imagination goes, right? This is like the unconscious mind going crazy. So you can do whatever you want. So that's how I see the space. So nothing has to necessarily be perfect.
Right. That's actually a really great thing too, because if you don't put those pressures on you for everything to be perfect, suddenly these happy accidents turn into really amazing, visually arresting pieces, right?
Right.
We met because of Neural Path. our mutual friend Charles Babb
Yes.
called me and said, I have somebody who's in a little bit of a pickle. Needs someone to stitch some VR, and I happen to know a bunch of people, and I introduced you to somebody. But tell us, just real quick sidebar, how did that happen? What happened?
Well, I was working with an editor who was helping me to, get this piece together, and something was happening on his end in his life, and I was premiering this piece at VRTO in 2016, and this was 7 days before the festival, and I had to submit this, like it needed to be, there. And just out of the blue, just stopped communicating with me, and I had to end up like starting from scratch in a lot of ways.
And you had the raw material, right? You had the raw files out of the camera, but you didn't have the stitches, you didn't have any of that stuff.
No.
And our mutual friend Braden Herrera,
yes,
let's give props to
shout
Braden.
Out to Braden.
Helped you stitch it, and then not only that, he got heavily involved with you in putting the piece together.
Well,
right?
it was after that project, we ended up working so well, so I ended up getting more clients from this project. I was just being a really big evangelist for the space, and I would always carry a headset in my bag.
Right.
And so because it was so new, I'd be at a party, and I'd show someone, and they'd become a client. And all of a sudden, it was just like this influx of work that I got from this one project. So I just kept bringing Braden along.
Oh, that's great.
And then now we're working on Metadimensional together.
Yes, definitely. And I know that Alex Chinu, who's also a member of the Butcher Bird family, has been helping me out a little bit. Mira Kim and Michael Henderson, all from Arbor Entertainment. Want to give them a shout out because they are also VR partners with us and develop a lot of VR work with us. Let's talk a little bit about, before we get into Metadimensional, let's talk about a little bit of the clients you've got from Neural Path. What kind of projects are they? What have the people been asking for? How are these projects coming about, and where are they being seen?
So a lot of these have been 360 pieces, especially since I also have a background in traditional production.
Sure.
I've also gotten, my production end of, people coming in and being like, oh, you've gotten into VR. Like I have someone who's looking to make a VR thing. So I've gotten clients through that end, and it's mainly 360 right now.
360 of what, though, specifically?
360 of, one was just, it was kind of like a promo for a clothing company.
Okay,
and
cool.
so it was just a whole bunch of their models, and we had, basically, mapped out the space, and it was this crazy thing we did with, confetti, and guy comes in and ruins the party for a little bit, and the girls win at the end of the day.
Okay, good. So there's a little bit of a narrative going on.
Yes,
there. Yeah.
And then there was a piece I did with an artist. It was a real estate piece, and he wanted to sell his property with his art. So I ended up doing a 360 piece because it's great for real estate to really be immersed in the space that you're gonna purchase potentially.
As a sidebar, we actually got approached to do some of that VR real estate things, and people were showing us this VR in Manhattan that was done for these high-end apartments, and is actually working against the real estate company, because when people could actually see how small they were less likely to go to, where if it was just photographs taken of the space, they'd be like, this is spacious, and then they see the VR piece and like, this is very small. Anyway.
Well, that's what VR is good for. It's
exactly.
Like,
the
there
truth.
it is. Yes. And I've done a couple of music videos as well.
Oh, cool.
Music videos in the space seem to be popular, especially since YouTube can support it.
Sure. Yeah. And Vimeo can support it now as well.
Right.
Yeah. So that's great that you've been doing this. You've been kind of developing a career in VR filmmaking based on this highly creative property you did. So it's not like you went out and did a spec piece for a known brand. You did your own thing first, and all this stuff is coming from that. So I'd like to now get into your latest piece, and maybe we could talk about maybe some of the lessons you carried over from Neural Path, and then talk about some of the new innovations that you added to this one. So why don't we take a real quick look at Metadimensional.
This is very, very strange. Portals. sensory bewilderment. Just trying to make sense.
So that was a clip from Metadimensional. I think, I guess the outside observer would note some interesting parallels between the two. Integration of 360 video and a strange animated world that doesn't necessarily have to look realistic. And a sort of a dream logic that's happening. As you mentioned at the beginning, this is about two sisters. Their father passes away and leaves this strange headset. What I love about that scene when they discover the headset, there are all these other headsets everywhere, all these other VR headsets, but this one's special.
Yes.
So why don't you tell a little bit, you told us what the plot was, right? Talk a little bit about Metadimensional. When people ask you about your new work, what do you say?
Well, it's really, usually when I tell people about my new work, it goes right over their heads because I'm basically, I'm trying to take the logic, the known logic of how we consume media and, how we experience a movie or a television show from start to finish, A to B. And that's all you get, right? That's all the story. You got to tune in for the next section that's A to B.
Yeah.
If it's a show.
Sure.
And so I want to basically, elaborate on that, and break that logic and really go, okay, well, it doesn't have to be linear necessary, but the narrative can expand infinitely.
And you could spend time in the space.
Right.
And the space itself drips with the narrative.
And there's, because of the whole logic of people not really understanding what, three-dimensional objects versus stereoscopic and confusing the 3D,
Sure.
there's a really confusing, a lot of the vernacular has not been established in the space yet,
yeah.
so it's very confusing for everyone.
Yeah, people often say, like, they start describing VR as 3D. They're going, oh yeah, 3D. I'm like, well, no.
Right. So I wanted to also elaborate on using the internet, the next evolution of the internet, and how we're going to experience, the web. And putting a story structure in there, and then as a way to explore something and really elaborate on something that, okay, now I've gone and seen this 360 piece. Now I'm in this space, which also just so happens to be social. So if you and me are both in a high-end headset, we can both go and explore these story worlds together.
Oh yeah, and we see each other in the world. Oh yeah, very, very cool.
And hear each other.
And what are you hoping what are people exploring when they're going into this world? What exactly are they exploring?
So there's still a lot of technological limitations, but ideally the world would expand where you would discover other conversations or other story elements that would expand on what you just saw. So now it's like, okay, it's uncovering more of the story.
Right.
And also uncovering different structure and environments, which is also part of the story.
And the story is basically what the father has left for them, right? You're discovering what the father has left, has put before them to open up their minds to a new kind of reality, a new kind of...
Right, dimensional space.
I like how you said, I was speaking it as a question, you said right. I loved that. It's like... Yes. Okay. Everything. What's the impetus for this project? Do you have a sister? Do you have a relationship like that you're?
I have a younger sister. I do
Okay.
have a younger sister. With this particular project, though, it was more like my friend who played the lead. We're friends, and we were, one day we were just talking. She's just like, girl, we're like the Hapa sisters, because we're both like half Asian and half, and we were just like, we're gonna be sisters one day in a piece. So it was just like, okay, I'm gonna drag my friend onto, this, so she'd be my Hapa sister.
Right. The other thing I noticed, both in Neuropath and this one, is that the performances are extremely stylized, right? You're not behaving like real human beings. Even in Neuropath, it was this kind of, you were this kind of like mystical witch type character almost. And in this one, I love your entrance is great. She's sitting there with your dying father. You come in like as if you're pissed off about something. She said, "Where have you been?" And you say, "Playing with fire." Like something no one would actually say.
Right.
But I loved it. I thought it was. So even in the reality, people aren't necessarily behaving like they would in reality.
Right.
And that's something that you gravitate towards.
No, I mean, I anything that goes beyond what we conceive as reality.
Perfect. Okay.
And, there is that big argument of, if if we are living in a simulation, right? And if infinite universes exist, then there's the possibility that we are and aren't. So that also exists within my project. I'm trying to make infinite
Yes.
possibilities available.
That is a perfect segue into the next piece we have from Metadimensional. So why don't we look at that piece, and then we could talk about how alternate realities exist. So I should explain one thing about how we captured that. We couldn't figure out exactly how to beam kind of someone using VR directly into our monitor. So what we did is we did a screen capture of someone moving through the space, and that's kind of what you're seeing. So I would highly recommend you seeing the actual experience either through a web browser or is there a way for people to see Neural Path?
Not quite yet.
Okay, great. Okay, well, at some point you guys are going to be able to see this,
Yes,
and it's
yes.
going to be amazing. What is going on in that scene right there?
So that scene is, I'm pretty sure you could get your head around how it was built. So the floating bubbles were captured with Snapchat spectacle glasses.
Right.
So they're little glasses that just have two little cameras. They capture 140-degree field of view, and I just thought they were great POV. So I just had my actors like, hey, put on these glasses, just press this button, and
And just get this footage.
So, we got this footage. We did shoot in 360, but we ended up not using that footage, but I was going to put in the web version of it.
Right.
And that initial set that she's standing on, she's kind of standing on a table, is the set that we Google Tango scanned.
Okay.
So the environment that you're seeing inside of the bubbles, you're actually standing in the three-dimensional set.
All right.
Surrounded by a couple of digital trees, surrounded by a 360 photo.
Okay, wow, you really
As a
are.
backdrop.
You're definitely layering a lot of different media in
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
That is really cool. What is happening story-wise in this scene? Like, what does she experience in this?
So she's kind of seeing this mysterious woman and her father. And she's just in here. And these bubbles are meant to be memories.
Okay.
Not necessarily her memories, but just memories, of both of them.
Right, like fragments of memory that are existing in this space.
Right.
Right.
And so she's just exploring, going about, what is this place? Who is this woman?
And when you show this to people, what is the response normally to this particular piece as opposed to Neuropath? Neuropath is the cool thing about Neuropath is that it's a very simple story, but it's just this psychedelic world, and then she wakes up and it's a dream, and you're like, aha.
Right.
This one is a little bit more contemplative. You're really sort of letting the audience sit with these images and with these characters for a longer period of time and asking them to look around.
Right.
So what is the response you're getting from this?
It's mixed. Well, Neural Path was a little bit more, if we were to give it, it's maybe PG-13 because of language and like drug references.
Sure.
Versus Metadimensional. I guess we could show it to a younger audience because there's nothing inappropriate in it.
Sure.
But it's meant to be the first episode of a series.
Right.
So it's kind of like a cliffhanger. You don't know. It doesn't really have like a full ending at that point. And I wanted to, let it drag on, and really utilizing space because I've seen other people really utilize 360 but not really utilize it because they're only using 180 degrees of the frame.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
it's like, well, I mean, yes, I guess you could use it in that way, but personally, I choose to utilize as much of the environment.
Yeah, I've always been, or at least advise against this impulse people have to make sure the audience is looking at one point. I think oftentimes and especially when VR first started, you get these filmmakers you're working with and they go, yeah, what we'll do is we'll have a sound happen over here so the audience will look over there. And I'm like, once you tell an audience where to look in the sphere, you've sort of made the medium irrelevant, right? You could just then make that a framed piece rather than and that's what I really appreciate about your stuff is that you're thinking about the entire space and you're thinking about, okay, no matter where my audience looks, they're going to be engaged with something. And that's going to compel them to keep looking around that space. And I think I noticed that in neural path, but I especially noticed it in metadimensional. And so I was just curious whether people were doing that. People were really spending time.
It's mixed, right? Some people will go through it and they're like, I don't get it. And some people are just like, that was interesting. So I'm getting more mixed emotions now. Some people come out and they think it was lovely. So this piece particularly, it's more like when I try to exhibit it, I try to exhibit it in headsets, ideally.
Sure. Yeah.
But this piece is meant to be experienced first through the 360, and then you jump into the web version, but into like a high-end headset like an Oculus Rift or a Vive.
Sure, right.
Where you experience these sets that you just saw in three-dimensional space.
Right.
So it's usually when I show people the second piece to what they just saw is usually when it clicks in their head. Oh my gosh, I can stick my head in this bush.
Right.
Like right now,
there's something about the reality around them that becomes interactive in that way.
Right.
That if they can control it, well, then it sort of gives them a new dimension to exploring the space. Right. Actually, let's. Why don't we take a look at our last clip, which is a screen capture we took of the space you're talking about. So let's take a look at that. Yeah, and I love how you kept everything as two-dimensional planes. It's just it adds such a spooky quality to it. So yeah, people can go in there and they can just explore that world.
Right, and I mean, it's just a website. So, I remember I was just demoing in Toronto this past weekend, and there was a kid who came and did my experience, and it was just like, okay, he went out, and I was like, yeah, you can explore this at home. He's like, I don't have a headset. It's like, no, it's just a website. You can just go on your computer browser and just go and explore on your keyboard. So I'm trying to, really take that learning curve of, we need a headset to experience immersive spaces, which isn't necessarily the case.
Well, you don't do it with video games. I mean, there's so many video games that are built in a 3D space, but you're moving through them in, first-person shooters, you're just blowing everybody away. But there are plenty of video games in which you actually are exploring a space. I guess what was really cool, I experienced that through a browser because I have a new baby and I didn't have time to get down to see the Vive. But what was really cool about it is I played a lot of first-person. I was in video games for a while, so I played a lot of first-person shooters. What I found was that movement configuration that's so common in first-person shooters, I was using and moving around the space pretty fluidly and seamlessly.
Right.
And I really appreciated that. So looking at all that, and looking at the way you're approaching this, the dream logic, the layering different kinds of media in the spherical space. In other words, looking at the spherical space, as I mentioned before, a blank canvas on which you can layer all sorts of things. It doesn't have to be 360 live action footage. It doesn't have to be full-on CGI. It's everything. First of all, how can audiences and when can audiences see neural path and metadimensional?
So neural path, I haven't decided quite yet.
Okay.
I have an initiative right now to try to combine a whole bunch of different platforms and really utilize a way to really push this series forward. Neural path, it's really hard to monetize 360 video at the moment.
Tell me about it.
And so it's one of those things where I'm kind of holding on to it, and I'm holding on to it because I don't want to necessarily release it out into the open.
Sure.
And if there were to be, because the space is still developing quite a lot.
Yeah.
And so, maybe there is going to be a platform that I will really utilize. But I'm trying to, maybe take this series and really grow an audience on there, because that is, YouTube is one way
The
to
series
really
being metadimensional.
metadimensional. Neural Path, I wouldn't really quite, maybe I'll release Neural Path on its own someday, but I kind of want to hold on to that for some reason.
Okay.
Metadimensional, though, will be released, and I think I'm going to go down the YouTube path in that regard, and then try to, really produce it out with, people that'll really propel it.
Sure, and by YouTube you mean release it on YouTube 360.
360, and then have the web version actually connected. So something I didn't really add was in that space. If you look behind, there's the poster that's floating, which is also a portal. So if you go in there, there's slides that tell you how it's actually formatted.
Oh, nice.
The piece.
Okay.
So ideally, like eventually, you'd have different portals where it'd be behind the scenes, and everything would be linked to YouTube. So it would be, one way that people would experience your channel three-dimensionally.
Right. They can link on. So basically, the portal would link to another video that would then fill up their screen.
Well, it would be like a floating sphere that you would go to the center of, and then you
okay.
could experience in 360.
Oh, very cool. And when do you have a time frame on when metadimensional might be out there?
I'm really
It's a loaded question.
it's I'm hoping that I could really get something. I think once I have all of the pieces fully produced out, all the episodes, then I'm going to release it consecutively week after week.
Oh, very cool.
And
Okay.
I think that might be, I'm projecting early of next year.
Okay, that's a nice way to start 2018.
I think 2018 is the big year for VR because you have Ready Player One coming out.
Yes.
So pop culturally, you'll have a big group of people that are going to hop onto the whole idea of immersive and virtual reality. And then I think with AR Kit and AR Core coming into the space, then you're going to get really this whole group of people that are going to really latch onto the whole immersive media space.
Right. Yeah, when the barrier to entry has dropped low enough where everybody can sort of engage it, then
Right, because they have the interest. Now they're seeking it, and so
Right,
you have to wait for that time where people are seeking what they
Yeah, totally. and it has been clumsy looking at VR stuff now. Either you're doing it on your phone, which is not the best way, or a Google headset, which, not Google, sorry, Samsung headset,
Right.
which overheats and other things like that. Or you have to have a very expensive system that can run an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive.
Right.
I mean, it's like there's not just an easy way to do this.
Yeah. I mean, PSVR would be like the low-end barrier to entry for but still, it's still
you have
a
to have
hefty
a
price.
PS4, and
Right.
then you also have to own the VR part of it, which is
Right.
another $600 or something.
Yeah, I think they lowered the price
Did they lower the
recently.
price?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think all of them are starting to lower the price because you have a lot of competitors coming into the space now.
Yeah, totally.
I think Dell and a whole bunch of other ones are coming in with their own headsets. So we'll see. They're coming in for Christmas. So
Great. Yeah. Exactly. Christmas season. That's the time where innovation seems to thrive. Well, I'd love to be able to throw this to some questions. If we have, no? Okay. Well, I have some other questions for you.
Yeah.
So we have this kind of VR space with lots of people doing lots of different things. And we've talked a lot about what you're doing in terms of, again, really playing with immersiveness. And a kind of a multimedia approach, giving people a sense of space and experience. What are other VR things out there that you've seen that have really made an impact on you that made you sort of consider things you hadn't before? Are there any pieces out there that have done something different for you?
Well, I'm still a big fan of Evolution of Verse.
Okay.
As a 360 piece.
Yes, and that's available on
Within.
It's Within, yeah. That's
So
right.
this is when Within was Verse, and this was the first piece that they made. Chris Milk and the guys, and this was you're basically on a lake bed, and you're looking around, and all of a sudden you get hit by this train that turns into a bunch of butterflies, and then you're like in this womb of a baby, and you're basically experiencing a whole space odyssey moment where you're like just floating with this baby.
And again, if you were to see it as a framed piece, you might go, that's a really interesting short film. But there's something about being in the middle of it.
Right.
And transitioning from one moment to the next that is just almost jarring.
And so I think, as a 360 piece, that always remains one of my staples.
Oh, good. I really like that piece too. Yeah.
And
Reggie Watts, a name drop again, When he was here talking about VR, he was talking about transitions specifically. He was saying that what's really wonderful about VR, and you see it in his piece, Waves, a lot, that the way you transition from one space to the next becomes such a potent force. Like when you're doing a film, transition from one scene to the next can be, white light or hard cut.
Right.
But in VR, it means something because it's literally transporting your body.
Yeah, and not all things work. Like I remember doing some earlier cuts with neural path, and then it was like, you see it equirectangularly, it's fine. You see it in a headset, and it's like,
Yeah.
what just happened? And it's like, okay, now we're dealing with people's heads right now. So you have to see the frame as someone's like, basically, cranium.
I got that with the size of text because I put the text on the equirectangular. I'm like, oh yeah, that looks fine. And I put it in like the text is huge.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So, any other pieces that did you like Waves? Did you check out Waves?
I haven't actually.
Okay, I should show that to you.
Okay.
It's good. But other pieces that you've seen that you really like?
You know what? Life of Us, another Chris Milk piece.
Right.
I do have to admit is, really.
It's Chris Milk fans across the board here.
I mean, overall, I like his work.
Yeah.
I really, I think his work, he's a visionary in his own regard.
Yeah.
And he was into the space early too. So probably not quite as early as some of my other friends, but he was one of those people who came in once that whole big, Oculus getting bought out by Facebook thing happened. And so, Life of Us is really, great in that, you really feel the presence of your friend that you're doing it with.
Yeah.
So you're going on this whole like crazy, adventure, and you're like transforming into different beings together with your friend. And it's just like, wow, like this like really, opens the medium for how this can be as like, an exploratory space with your friend.
Yeah.
And exploring even embodiment,
That is interesting too, because I think there is a comment I often get is that VR is this isolated experience, which again, I'm not scared of that. I like that. I mean, so is reading a novel, and it's not like
Right.
that's a bad experience. I mean, you're isolated,
Yeah.
No one group reads novels. But the thing about it is that there is technology being developed to share these experiences with other people, and it seems like your work really welcomes that a lot.
Yeah, and I'm trying to make my work accessible to people, and that's the bottom line too, because at least
Despite it being kind of weird and trippy and psychedelic,
Right.
at the core of it, you really do want people to.
well, accessibility too, in that I didn't want to make it a high-end, something that is built natively, and where you have to export a file and download it and do all
Sure.
this stuff. I wanted it to be okay. Most people that are going to experience VR are going to see it in 360. They're not going to see it in a headset. They're going to see it through a magic window.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to hit this magic window demographic that like still moves the frame, and it's like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so try to lure them in by going, oh, now click on this website, and then that like takes them into the metaverse. So
Cool. Well, let's. We're just gonna.
One question actually just came in.
Oh, yes, please.
Let me read that for.
So the question is from Darren Bennett. As someone who isn't familiar with VR entertainment beyond video games, where and how do you find pieces to watch? You touched on the point of entry, Oculus Rift, PSVR, etc. Are there other accessible ways to watch?
That is a really good question, and we've talked a little bit about them. We talked about Within and some of those other channels, but they're all within the Samsung store. Right?
Not all of them. I was going to also put, you have the web VR space really coming out, and I have a whole bunch of friends just sending me URLs into, immersive spaces. So,
And what are some of those? If people wanted to look up some
actually,
stuff.
I'll give metadimensional people it's cool with a K, so kool.website/MD for metadimensional. Or you can just do cool.website, which is actually my friend who built that site, and he has a whole bunch of other spaces that you can go and explore.
That's interesting. So but what's happening is that the ones that are most accessible are the ones that people are building themselves, not the ones that the big companies are putting together.
Right, and that's the thing, when you come and you're getting, these high budget, pieces that they're pumping a lot of money into, a lot of them, they'll release into the stores, but there's quite a few handful of them, they won't release them because there's not really a market for them yet, so they're holding on to the material because they spent all this money and they don't want to burn that bridge. So it's this whole, okay, you've got web VR that you can really access, and then all the 360 pieces are really accessible. YouTube and Vimeo are great as well.
Yeah, you could just look up is there a way to look it up?
Hashtag 360 video.
Okay, so
Yep.
look up hashtag 360 video on either YouTube or.
I'm not 100% on Vimeo, but YouTube for sure. I know that's the
Right,
hashtag
okay.
for. So
And Vimeo is doing a lot of 360 too. If you
Yeah.
guys go onto Vimeo, you can see a lot of really
and
interesting
Vimeo
stuff.
is a great place too. I've even thought about even for monetization because they allow you to rent out certain pieces that you upload on there for a certain price. So
Oh, right. People can like license them or something and
Right.
use them for other things. Oh, that's great too. Yeah, that's something that obviously we get approached a lot because
Right.
we have this bed of really interesting VR, but everybody wants to. Oh, can I show that at my event? We're like, oh. For free again? Okay, sure. But that's great. That's great that people can actually license it through there. So I guess thank you, Darren, for your question, because I think that is one of the things we're getting at here, and that is there's a lot of interesting, cool innovation happening in the VR filmmaking space and just the world building space that no one's really able to access because they feel like they need a headset or they feel like they need an Oculus Rift or something like that.
Right.
So definitely YouTube, Vimeo. I want to end real quick just with asking, based on a question our producer, Stephen Calcutt, mentioned, what is next for you? Have you thought about what your artistic ambitions are beyond metadimensional in terms of the immersive space?
well, I really want to delve into the whole like AR space, especially
right, of
since I
course.
know I firmly believe that AR is going to be the propelling force for immersive media, and metadimensional is so open-ended, and that it can expand to all kinds of different platforms. So my intention is even to expand metadimensional to an AR space.
So you can just like see a space around you, but there's a portal over there.
Right. And now you're actually, in being able to like walk into the portal, and now you're into the web VR space that already exists, so it's going, in and out of.
Oh, interesting.
So expanding it that way, and then I've got a few other projects I've got in the works.
Right.
I've got this AR project. I'm writing a comedy about my family.
In the immersive space?
In the immersive space, but this is like something I feel like I hardly want the tech to really advance and the market to really form before I really
right.
tackle this one endeavor. But it's supposed to be basically the story of my life,
Nice.
but expanded in so many different ways. In that, like my family, my father's family, they're all refugees from the Vietnam War.
Right.
And so experiencing the Vietnam War as a Vietnamese refugee, in the whole, no one really, a lot of,
Right.
especially, content coming out of America is always from the American perspective. And so,
Totally.
Being able to go into that space, especially in VR.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's great. That sounds really interesting. I also thought it was interesting, too, the idea that you want to work in AR, but what you're looking for is sort of the seamless integration of AR, VR, gaming elements.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds really, really exciting. So pretty much just let's allow media to completely to converge, and we have this one bulk of media space that sort of thrives with a creative vitality to it, right?
Indeed.
Well, I think in a nutshell, that definitely describes your work. And thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you're interested in seeing some of your work, what's the website?
Yes, so cool. So kool.website/MD for metadimensional. So
Great. And again, look out for Michaella Vu. I think she's going to be a huge force in VR creativity. We were very lucky to have her here. And keep watching Butcherbird Presents. Again, like our Facebook page if you like watching these Facebook live streams we do. And we want to continue coming at you with conversations about people doing interesting stuff in the digital space. So again, Michaella, thank you.
thank you.
And thank you for watching.
Thank you.